Gary, thing number one, we're talking Russia has been talking about limiting exports on uranium. The market is already in a deficit. Gary, thing number one of this week's five things, the pivot week issue, is uranium the next big play in energy? Tell us more about that.
So, Rob, this is a confluence of two events. First, in the first quarter of 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States put in place a series of financial sanctions against Russia. At the time, DKI came out. I wrote a whole bunch of lengthy pieces explaining why these sanctions were not going to be effective. People got angry. They thought I was supporting Putin. I was not. I'm not. My point was the sanctions were not going to be effective. They haven't been. I'm not cheering for Putin. I'm not on their side. I'm saying we didn't design the sanctions well. Um, anyway, so 2.5 years later, the Russian economy is not in shambles. The Russian ability to make war has not been eliminated. And now with uranium supplies tight on a worldwide basis, it's something we've been talking about on this channel, on this show for months. Putin is now saying that Russia is considering imposing export restrictions on uranium. That would cause an already tight worldwide market to tighten even more. Russia is one of the large producers in the world. There are a few countries that produce a lot of uranium, but it's not a long list. And that market is extremely tight right now. The current demand for uranium is somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 30 million tons above current supply. And, one of the things we've talked about is that a lot of the big suppliers, and we've talked about Kazatomprom, we've talked about CCJ out of Canada, that's Cameco, they're not increasing supply. They're actually buying in the spot market. So this is, potentially an issue for people who want uranium. It is potentially a benefit for people who own uranium, like DKI subscribers. The other thing, I give our subscribers a ton of credit. I had multiple people in the last week pinging my inbox talking about the U.S. repurposing warheads. So what they're doing is they're taking apart nuclear warheads and using that fuel to power nuclear reactors. Sounds like a pretty good idea, right? Better to make energy than war. I totally get that. But the sort of fear was, oh no, if we do this, is the price of uranium going to drop? And if you take a look, the estimate is that the US needs something like 40 million tons of uranium between now and 2030. So ballpark half a decade. Our current capacity to prepare, it's called HALEU. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right. It's spelled HALEU. It stands for high assay, low enriched uranium. But our ability to turn that into fuel in a nuclear reactor is less than 1 million tons per year. So we need 40 over the next 5 years. We can produce under 1 per year, or a total of, somewhere 4 to 6 over the next few years. So, I understand. I think it's great that people were sending me this information and saying, hey, does this matter? Love getting that kind of feedback, love having those discussions with our subscribers. But the answer is, this may be it may be good policy, but it's not going to be enough to create enough supply to satisfy the excess demand.
Gary, the U.S. has leaned heavily on Russia's uranium reserves. Obviously, the war in Ukraine risks that. With this limiting supply coming from Russia, the U.S. is rushing to develop, as you're mentioning. Two-part question here. Number one, why are we rushing? Why were we not proactive? And secondly, why uranium as well?
Well, so let's take those in reverse order.
Sure.
The reason uranium matters is it's for two reasons. One is there is an almost perfect correlation between energy use and having a high material quality of living. If you take a look, however you want to define being materially comfortable, having lots of goods and services, living a comfortable life. Again, we're not talking about your spiritual life or your family life. These things matter. But we're talking about a material life. Um, there's an almost perfect correlation. As you use more energy, you have a more comfortable life. There are, roughly 3 billion people in the world, and just China and India alone, that want better lives, that want to be more comfortable. At a minimum, the people in India certainly want air conditioning. Um, and so, or at least a large part of India. Um, so nuclear power is reliable, it is incredibly efficient, and it's carbon free. So for environmental reasons, right or wrong, it's very hard to get projects approved that will put a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. And I'm not taking a political stand on this. I know there are people who feel very strongly on both sides, but if you think that the amount of carbon we put in the atmosphere doesn't matter, you'd still like nuclear because it's reliable and inexpensive. If, on the other hand, you believe that putting carbon into the atmosphere is going to destroy the planet, you should love nuclear because it is carbon-free energy. The other thing is, take a look, this, all the EVs that people want, the AI future that people want, those data centers use something like 6 or 7 times as much energy as a regular data center, an AI-based one. Those NVIDIA chips use massive amounts of energy. And so basically, everything that everybody wants to live what they would consider to be a good life will require more energy. Politically, it's not feasible to build a lot of carbon use kinds of plants. Things like solar and wind are not reliable enough to power a data center where you need like 99.999% uptime and reliability. So uranium is the answer to that. Nuclear is the answer to that. And the reason this matters is because the world has been in deficit for years. And right now, the annual deficit, like I said, is 15 to 30 million tons a year. Ballpark 2-3 years ago, worldwide not supply, worldwide stockpiles were about 150 million pounds. And so we're down to maybe like 2-3 years of enough supply. And what's happening right now is people are building nuclear plants all over the world. People are extending the permitted life of plants from 40 years to 60 years. And, we just saw a couple weeks ago in Michigan, they are trying to recommission a decommissioned nuclear plant. This has never been done in the history of the world. So demand is not changing. Why we're late on this? I don't know, Rob. In general, the United States does not have a functional energy policy. I wrote an article about that a couple of years ago, that our current administration does not have anything resembling a coherent energy policy. None of this makes sense. And so, people should be reacting to it. But until they do, what that means is that demand for uranium is continuing to go up. Supply is not reacting. We're already in a deficit. And I can tell you personally, I own enormous amounts of uranium because the only thing that can adjust right here is the price. DKI subscribers have been in uranium for a couple of years now. Our returns in the name and their returns, our subscribers' returns, have been enormous. We've made a ton of money on this thesis.
Gary, great summary there on uranium, the market, what's happening. And obviously, premium subscribers have access to that portfolio position, as well as any of Gary's moves within the portfolio as time goes on.